This is the fifth video on using Aider.AI, a pair programmer for programmers, and what we're going to do in this video is host it within a web server so that we can call it from other tools. So please like and subscribe if you want to see other videos in the series. I'm AppyDave. Let's get into it. Now I'm just over at the AppyDave repo, and earlier in this series we built the presentation tool using Aider. We've also gone and documented the game Doom by ID Software using a bulk file system and Aider. What we're going to do today is look at the Aider web server, and I haven't done anything right now, so we're just going to grab this, come down to a terminal and just start off with a clean repository from which to build this application. Lastly, we'll just type in Aider and get it up and running, ready to go. It's looking to add some environment setup and the chat conversation history. And so now what I want to do is just put together a prompt that might help us build this particular application. So whenever I'm building an application from scratch, I like to build a relatively detailed requirements document, and the way I would do that here is I'd come down and select canvas mode, which we've seen here, and I'll paste in information and have a conversation, and by the end of this conversation we end up with this requirements document. Now the requirements document for the Aider web API is that it should interact with the Aider scripting tool using Python. We want to run it as a local web server. I do want to run it from more than one directory at the same time, because theoretically I should be able to write code against two different projects if I like from an external tool. Now I've designed a little bit of flexibility into the requirements document on how that should happen. So would we run the application from two different repos just with different port numbers? That's one option. The other option is, can we change the directory inside of the application? Now I'm not sure how effective that'll be with environments and stuff like that, so I've given myself leeway to go in either direction. But the primary idea is that we have a code assistant endpoint and it takes an instruction. Now if we go and look at the documentation from Aider, you can see that that's generally how this works. You give it a message and you can optionally give it some file names. So what I've also said is that files are available, and after that we've got the directory which will test whether this is going to work or whether we should be running multiple web servers, and then there's options. Now I grabbed the options out of this document and I've just pasted it in. Now they also give an example of how to use it in Python, but they've been clear to say that it's not officially. Now I've mentioned that we're using Flask to build the web server, and it's given a little bit of information around how to deal with the directory changing. At the bottom we've got some use cases, and it's talking about a couple of trade-offs about whether one or multiple web servers is the way to go, and I've given it a really simple testing plan. So what I think we can do now is just go and copy this document and we'll put it into Aider and see what it generates. So I've come down to the terminal, and what I'll do is just paste in all the information. Now I haven't pressed enter just yet, because what I think we should do is just pop on over to Visual Studio on this directory and just have a look at what we get to start off with. So the first thing we've got is just an input history. We've got the chat history that we've started, and that's before I've pressed enter. So this ability to press enter and see this come through should come into this area. The chat history, which is everything going on, should also happen. There's also this cached database going on. I think we should just press enter and see what starts to happen. Well, we've just seen firstly that the Aider chat history has been updated. If we look at the input history, we see that going. So I accidentally said yes to reading this URL, which is for an application that hasn't been built yet, so it doesn't make any sense. But then what it's done is come up with a plan of action from the requirements document. So it feels like it needs a web server, it needs an endpoint for the code assistant. We got the requirement asking, would I like to proceed? So I've just said, can you create it? So we've got the code being created as per the instructions. So we've got the web server coming in, we've got the endpoint, it'll be code assistant. After that we've got a init with just a comment for now. Then we've got the code assistant under the API directory, and we've got some instructions. It's changing directories if that's provided. And then it looks like the code that we used or found in the documentation online, we might need to confirm that. we got some information here about options. After that, we got the requirements document for Python installation. So it's looking at installing it and getting it running on a particular port. And at the end, we've got a list of everything that it's implemented. So this is great. And we've got the curl requests that we can test it with. So where are we at now? It looks like we can now try to start creating these files because they haven't been created just yet. Now it's got this question, would you like me to proceed with creating the files? So I think we'll bring up Visual Studio so we can see this, and we'll press yes, and I've done something wrong there. We'll press yes again, and yes, yes, yes. So we've got 4 files that have been created. We'll execute on this Python install, and it says it's running. Now it's running within the Aider environment. We might want to start this in a separate process. Now before we start the web server, let's have a look at what we've got here. So we've got the code assistant endpoint. It's marshalling any incoming parameters and delegating responsibility to the code assistant. Now we can see the code assistant over here. We've got some comments. We've got a directory that we can change to. We're using the model. Probably don't want to say GPT-4 Turbo by default, so we'll check on that. It's got a list of file names. Now, when I was looking through the documentation, I noticed that there was both the file names that could be changed and also the file names that could be marked as read-only. So it might be useful to have parameters for that in the future. But let's head over to the terminal and we'll just kick off the server for now. And so we've got a server running, and if we create another terminal, we should be able to do a curl request, and we'll try the one that just says create a script and see what comes through on this. And this is looking good. It's hit the server. It's not doing anything. So let's create a script called hello world, say hi from AppyDave, and we'll press enter on that. Now this is where we'll probably find some challenges using this particular technique, and it might be the reason why they haven't exposed it this way. So in a previous test, it asked the question in the server, which meant you had to go from the terminal you were doing the curl requests on over to the terminal and press yes. Now it's not actually doing it at all. So what I'm going to do is try and get it to do it through a prompt. So we'll say, please add hello world.py. We'll press yes, and we've got something going on here, and that didn't do anything. So we'll try another one, and we'll be quite explicit, and we'll go back to the previous instruction that says create a script called hello world.py, say hi from AppyDave, and let's see what happens in that particular case. Now it's writing it, and this is where you can see that it's actually giving the question in the terminal. Now, this ability to say yes to files is apparently a parameter you can use from the bash command line. I haven't tried it in the library, but we'll see what we can do with that later on. But let's see if we get something created. And it looks like it's created something. Let's head over to VS Code, and we've got our script, hi from AppyDave. So I had to be quite explicit to get this to work. So the interactivity that we get from the terminal is not currently available in the version that we've done using web services, but we are on to a good start. We'll see what we can do with this over a few more iterations. So what I'd like to do now is test it against a different repo. So we'll just start a new terminal, and we'll go down to the dev directory, and we'll go into the Doom with Docs. Now, Doom with Docs is from the previous video where I documented the game by ID software using Aider. Now we'll just have a ls, see what's in there, and maybe just open it up in VS Code. So you can see all this documentation that was built against all the C files. They're all listed here. And this was done in a batch operation. But it might be useful to figure out what, and make it a parameter in our curl request and see if it works here. Now, I haven't started from a new clean repo. I've used the one on my computer, which already has chat history, which we can see here and here around what I last did with Aider. So what we might do is go down to the bottom of each of the files and just see whether the changes we make will happen here. Now, the other thing I've done is just modified that prompt that we were looking at, create a script called hello world. Let's say Doom from AppyDave. And I've just put in the directory, and we've got it running here. Let's test it out in the terminal. Now we're ready to go. We've got Aider web server running in the folder where it actually is, and that would be where it would normally send requests to, but we're going to give the directory option, so we'll paste it in. We've got the same question as before, create a file called hello-world.py, but say doom from AppyDave, and the only other thing we've done is change the directory. So now it's hitting the web server and something is happening. It's saying yes or no. We'll say yes with that. It's applied a file, and look at that, it's actually done it in our new system, Doom from AppyDave. So this is a second repo that we've communicated from using the same web server. So let's go over where we're at and what could be done next. So we've got the Aider web server up here, we've got the description, and I've just added in the actual requirements that I used to build this application. Now, luckily for us, this was pretty much a one-shot prompt. I didn't really need to change anything to make it work the way we've seen it so far. So why don't we just go into a web view of this and see the code as it currently stands. So we've got the hello world that we did against the Aider web server. We've got the actual web server going on here. We've tested it with an instruction. We've also tested it with a directory. So if we go and have a look at how that code was actually implemented, we can see that all it's really doing is changing to the directory to execute the Aider scripts from that point of view. We have not tested file names coming in, and we actually haven't tested any of these options. The other thing we haven't tested as yet is whether it can be run as two separate web servers. Now, it should work okay, but at least one of the use cases of just changing to a different folder and targeting that is working. Now, if you want the code, you can obviously go and download the repo here. If, on the other hand, you want to recreate it from scratch, it's pretty simple because we did it all as a one-shot prompt, and I've given you all the information here. Something that you might want to change is you might not want to use Flask as the framework, or there might be other options that you want to add into this system and build it all yourself from scratch. So that's the 5th video in our Aider series, and there is a link to the playlist in the description. But in the next video, what I thought I'd do is create a domain-specific language to make it really easy to call this tool just from little text files in my IDE. I'm AppyDave. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.